Greetings, dear viewers. You're watching the Krasmodo channel. The company Peugeot is well known to many for its cars, and in the movie Taxi, they even showed the best car in the world. Just so you know, that was sarcasm. However, fewer people know that Peugeot used to make and still makes motorcycles, and also that the company is currently the oldest existing scooter manufacturer. Friends, in this segment, I want to tell you about the history of motorcycles that have a lion on their logo. Along the way, we will get acquainted with a lot of historical context, which is simply necessary for a better understanding of the material. So make yourselves comfortable. Let's begin. To understand who the Peugeot family is and how they came to produce cars and motorcycles, we need to delve into history. And yes, the material in this chapter will closely overlap with Asafiev's documentary about the giants of the French automotive industry.
Bonjour, madame.
If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. The first mention of the Peugeot family name dates back to the 15th century AD. It was then that a record appeared in the chronicles about this family, who lived in the vicinity of Montbéliard, now Vendoncourt, whose main occupation was agriculture. The first revolution in the family's business was made by the cousin Jean-Pierre and Jean-Frédéric Peugeot in 1810. At that time, an industrial revolution was brewing in France, and it was obvious that the brothers wanted to earn more money in promising new industries. Peugeot repurposed one of their mills in the town of Sucraté into a small industrial enterprise. Initially, it was limited to producing various steel products. They produced clock springs, as well as saw blades and steel strips. In 1818, a rolling mill was established, and the brothers adopted an innovative metalworking technology. Another 6 years later, there was a significant increase in production. The range of products continued to expand, and Jean-Pierre and Jean-Frédéric began to produce more advanced and complex products for that time. Coffee grinders, tools, mills for spices, coffee and seasonings, hooks for crinolines. Just so you know, that's a kind of metal frame for skirts that were fashionable in high society at that time. Irons, sewing machines, umbrellas, and so on. By the way, Peugeot mills already had a lifetime warranty on the metal parts back then. On November 20-20, 1858, Émile Peugeot patented the image of a lion as a trademark. In the Russian Empire at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, the Peugeot company was primarily known as a manufacturer of carpentry tools. Chisels, planes, drills, and braces. These tools were quite expensive. For example, a simple Peugeot plane in 1901 cost 1 ruble and 97 kopecks, which was comparable to the price of a cow. On June 18, 1849, Armand Peugeot was born, the next significant figure in the Peugeot family. Young Armand was sent to study in Britain, where he became interested in engines and penny farthings. The last term, by the way, is neither something obscene nor a swear word. It's the name of a bicycle with a large front wheel. After returning home, Armand convinced his family that these bicycles were wildly popular and that they urgently needed to start producing them. In 1882, Armand Peugeot presented his penny farthing Le Grand B and a number of other bicycles. A little later, after meeting with Gottlieb Daimler, Armand became convinced of the viability of the automobile. However, his brother Eugène Peugeot believed that automobiles were just a fad that would soon go out of fashion. Armand Peugeot did not give up on his ideas, and the three-wheeled steam car designed by Léon Serpollet was ready in 1889. The steam engine was heavy and bulky and required a long warm-up time. In 1890, after a meeting between Daimler and Émile Levasseur, the steam engine in the four-wheeled car was replaced with an internal combustion gasoline engine, which was built by Panhard under Daimler's license. In 1896, the cousins Armand Peugeot and Eugène Peugeot founded the Peugeot Automobile Company, which began manufacturing cars. And if the company is involved in bicycles, cars, engines, and other things, then why not make a motorcycle, a new, interesting, and possibly promising means of transportation? In 1999, Eugène created the first Peugeot motorcycle. He mounted a Swiss Zeidel engine with 1.5 horsepower, an automatic intake valve, an evaporative type carburetor, and battery ignition at an angle under the bicycle frame. The look of the first motorcycle was completed by a belt drive for the rear wheel and a caliper rear brake. However, some claim that the first true motorcycle should be considered the Peugeot tricycle, built in 1898 with a De Dion Bouton engine mounted on the rear wheel. This model was shown at the Paris exhibition in 1898, but it was not put into production. Since 1902, Peugeot motorcycles were already offered with a specially designed chassis. The Zeidel engine, with a power of 2 horsepower, was mounted vertically inside the frame, and the brakes acted on both wheels. This was already progress. Within a year, the Peugeot brothers produced their own similar engine. From that moment on, for quite a long time, 2 letters were cast on the crankcase, PF, which actually stood for Peugeot Brothers. This division of the company, headed by Eugène Peugeot, was directly involved in motorcycle activities. Starting from 1904, Peugeot motorcycles were equipped only with their own engines, with a displacement of 238 cubic centimeters and a power output of 2.5 horsepower. A motorcycle with such an engine could reach speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, thanks in part to a special sprung front fork designed by the Peugeot brothers, which was called the Truffaut fork. That same year, a more powerful version of the engine appeared, 333 cubic centimeters, with 2.75 horsepower. The Peugeot brothers knew very well that sporting success is always a great driver of sales. In 1904, they decided to go for the International World Speed Record, for which they prepared a reinforced chassis. The motorcycle was prepared for the class up to 50 kilograms. Yes, that's how motorcycles were classified at that time. And in order to fit into these limits, everything had to be lightened. So, wheels with special tires were ordered from the Volbe factory. They had wooden rims with a diameter of 650 millimeters, and the weight of the wheel was only 700 grams. The V-shaped engine for the record motorcycle was taken from a Peugeot car and had the following specifications: 1.5 liters of displacement and 12 horsepower. To reduce weight, the ribbing was kept only on the cylinder heads. The cylinders themselves had smooth outer walls. On October 2, 1904, the racer Lanfranchi managed to set a world record, reaching a speed of 123.293 kilometers per hour. The following year, the racer Césac, on a similar motorcycle with a 1.7-liter engine, surpassed this achievement by reaching a speed of 140.62 kilometers per hour. Inspired by these achievements, the Peugeot company began producing an entire line of V-type engines with a cylinder angle of 45 degrees. The lightest 350cc version produced 2.75 horsepower, while the most powerful was the 1-liter, 7-horsepower engine. Single-cylinder engines, meanwhile, also strengthened their position in the market. Taking part in the 1905 Tour de France race, which had a distance of 2,134 kilometers, the racers Césac and Japon, riding Peugeot motorcycles with a 333cc side valve engine, took first and second places respectively, which contributed to the increase in sales of these models. In 1906, the chassis of the motorcycles underwent changes. A reinforced open frame could be equipped at the customer's request with either a rigid or a spring-loaded lever-type front fork. The nickel-plated tank contained not only reservoirs for gasoline and oil, but also a compartment for the ignition system battery. Peugeot engines, especially the 2-cylinder ones, were in steady demand. Since 1904, they had been supplied to the English company Norton, and in 1907, Rem Fowler, riding a Norton motorcycle with a two-cylinder V-shaped 700cc Peugeot engine, started in the very first tourist trophy race, and won in the two-cylinder class, showing an average speed of 69.1 kilometers per hour. If you think that's a weak result, then get in your car or on your motorcycle, turn on your navigator, and drive around your neighborhood for a couple of hours. And most likely, your average speed will turn out to be lower than 60 or even 55 kilometers per hour. Another company that installed a Peugeot engine in 1908 was North London Garage, or NLG for short. It was a 1-liter V-twin. The racer Will Cook set several speed records on such a motorcycle. And then, in 1909, Eugène Peugeot passed away. After Eugène's death, his sons, Pierre, Robert, and Jules, took over the management of the motorcycle division. The following year, they joined forces with their uncle Armand Peugeot, who outlived his brother by 6 years, and established a single enterprise, the Peugeot Automobile and Motorcycle Joint Stock Company. The novelty of that season was the lightweight motorcycle Motocyclette Légère, which featured a V-twin engine, 333cc 2.5 horsepower, with automatic intake valves, a round nickel-plated tank, and a true-fault front fork. In 1912, the engine displacement was increased to 380cc. At the same time, the MX model with a single-cylinder, side-valve, 500cc engine producing 3.5 horsepower went into production. In 1913, the Paris-Nice model debuted, named after its victories in the race along that route. The main feature of the bike was a new generation V-twin, side-valve engine with 350cc and 3.5 horsepower. However, all these models were rather mediocre, all except one. In 1912, an employee of the automobile division of the company, Ernest Henry, created a 4-cylinder overhead valve, twin-cam engine for a racing car. Based on this development, he also designed a motorcycle version. The engine, with 2 vertical cylinders mounted transversely in the frame, featured a cylinder head with 8 valves and 2 camshafts, driven by a complex gear train. The motorcycle was also equipped with a 3-speed gearbox, mounted directly next to the engine, a parallelogram front fork, and a chain drive for the rear wheel. On this motorcycle, Paul Pian successfully competed in numerous races until the early 1920s. Mass production of similar engines never happened. The cylinder head operated under very harsh thermal conditions, and Peugeot specialists preferred to develop V-twin engines. After the start of World War I, the Peugeot company supplied cars and motorcycles to the Army, while also selling some on the domestic market. By that time, the company had introduced the heavy model MT into its lineup, not to be confused with Grandpa's M Technik, which is sitting in the shed, with a V-shaped 2-cylinder engine of 660 cubic centimeters, 6 horsepower, and a direct belt drive to the rear wheel. In 1917, the engine displacement was increased to 740 cubic centimeters. The power remained the same, but a 3-speed gearbox was added to the transmission. It was these machines, both with a sidecar and in solo version, that formed the backbone of military deliveries and were produced until 1921. The war ended, and in the early 20s, everyone started talking again about the sporting successes of Peugeot motorcycles. The young engineer Lesman Antoinesco, who joined the company in 1919, modernized the pre-war 500cc overhead cam twin, creating a simplified cylinder head for it with a single camshaft and 2 valves per cylinder. The camshaft was now driven not by a bunch of gears, but by a vertical shaft with 2 pairs of bevel gears. Thanks to the larger valve heads, cylinder filling did not suffer, while the cylinder head operated under less stressful conditions. The new engine developed 25 horsepower and proved to be very reliable and competitive. In the early 20s, 2-stroke engines appeared on the French motorcycle scene, immediately gaining popularity primarily due to their simplicity and low price. The Peugeot company did not stay away from this process, presenting its touring motorcycle, the Motocyclette de Tourisme, in 1921. The lightweight AP model received a new chassis with a swing-arm front fork, suspended on an almost vertical short-quarter elliptical spring. The main thing, however, was that the machine was equipped with a two-stroke engine with a forward-tilted cylinder and a two-speed gearbox, which was purchased from a competitor, the Terra Company. The following year, another new product from Peugeot appeared on the market, the Cyclo-Moto CM1 motorized bicycle, featuring a 110cc two-stroke engine with 1.5 horsepower, a direct belt drive to the rear wheel, an additional pedal drive, a parallelogram front fork with a single central spring, and a new frame, which was offered in two versions, ladies and men's. The maximum speed of both versions did not exceed 30 kilometers per hour. There was even an elaborate prototype, the Cyclo-Moto, with an engine mounted on the front wheel, but this design had no future. In October 1925 at the Paris Motor Show, a new Peugeot motorcycle with a 175cc two-stroke engine was presented to the public. This machine was distinguished primarily by an absolutely new engine unit, where the two-speed gearbox with a kickstarter was housed in a single casing with the engine, and the engine transmission was gear-driven. In 1926, the Peugeot company was once again divided into automobile and motorcycle divisions. The motorcycle division was headed by Robert Peugeot, the second son of Eugène Peugeot. Engineer Cunel, a Belgian who had previously worked at the Gillett-Herstal Company, replaced Antoinesco. Soon, he developed the P104 motorcycle model with a side-valve engine of 316cc integrated with a 3-speed gearbox, the first 4-stroke unit construction engine by Peugeot. At the same time, the upgraded lightweight motorcycles P101 and P102 appeared, equipped with a 175cc two-stroke engine. At the same time, the first machine had a direct drive from the engine to the rear wheel, while the second had a 2-speed gearbox. The center of attention at the Peugeot motorcycle division's exhibit at the Paris show was the P105 model, which quickly became the company's flagship. New trends in motorcycle design were represented by a saddle-shaped fuel tank and an overhead valve engine with a displacement of 350 cubic centimeters and a power output of 10 horsepower. The valve rocker arms, mounted on ball bearings instead of bushings, were operated by long push rods enclosed in a vertical tubular casing. The engine was paired with a 3-speed gearbox. The oil reservoir was located in one of the compartments of the crankcase. For the first time on Peugeot motorcycles, separate magneto and generator were installed on the engine. The P105 model turned out to be successful and popular, and was produced until 1936. The first half of the 1930s brought a complete renewal of Peugeot's production program. First, in 1932, the A50, a 100cc motorized bicycle without a gearbox, entered the market. It was produced in two versions, ladies and men's, each of which had several modifications. Then, in 1933, 1934, the entire 4-stroke family underwent modernization. At the same time as the old models, completely new motorcycles with a fully redesigned power unit entered the market. The new engine included a 4-speed gearbox. From 1933 onward, the pinnacle of the Peugeot motorcycle division's lineup was its 500cc motorcycles. First, there was the side-valve model P517 with 12 horsepower, then the similar P503, and the overhead valve P515 with 20 horsepower. All the machines received a long-stroke engine, which with a displacement of 500cc provided a decent amount of torque. The Peugeot P515 motorcycle could reach speeds of up to 140 kilometers per hour. In 1934, the Peugeot P515 motorcycle broke 9 international records. Here is one of them. The machine covered a distance of 3,000 kilometers at an average speed of 118 kilometers per hour. The beautiful high-speed motorcycle quickly became one of the leaders of the French motorcycle market. The military couldn't ignore it either, and in the second half of the 1930s, the Army was supplied not only with both 500 cubic versions, the side valve and overhead valve respectively, but also with the P112 and P135 models. During World War II, Peugeot's factories ended up under German occupation. Like many companies in France, the company had to work for the Germans. However, employees, leaders, and local resistance networks did everything they could to slow down and sabotage this cooperation, while trying to avoid or limit German reprisals. After the war, Peugeot's motorcycle division continued producing the lightest models with two-stroke block engines, the P54 100cc 2.5 horsepower and the P55 125cc 4 horsepower. This was absolutely the right move, since the overwhelming majority of the post-war French population could not afford anything more. By 1950, these motorcycles were already equipped with a telescopic front fork, and the gearbox received a foot-operated shifting mechanism. Starting from 1949, the Model 156 went into production, 150cc 5 horsepower, and it received a 4-speed gearbox. Soon, a similar model, the P175, was added to it. 4-stroke motorcycles completely disappeared from the company's lineup, and the largest Peugeot motorcycle became the 2-cylinder Model 256, with a 250cc engine produced in 1954. And in 1958, it was replaced by the 330cc version, the Model 356, which was produced for just over a year. It should be noted that in 1958, the Peugeot Group acquired the bankrupt remnants of its former main competitor, the Tarot Company. However, motorcycle production still had to be stopped. But the S55 and S57 scooters, which appeared in 1954, were destined to lay the foundation for the company's new policy. Yes, friends, I also had a question at the time of writing this text. Wait, hold on, what do you mean? They made motorcycles for so many years and now suddenly, only motor scooters and later scooters? As far as I was able to find out, the main reason was the crisis that Peugeot was going through. In particular, the motorcycle division's crisis in the early 50s, and at the same time, the rise of the scooter movement in Europe, which was actively pushing other small displacement motorcycles out of the market. From history, we know that the Peugeot family almost always managed to jump on the departing train of hype and trends. In 1953, Peugeot responded with the S55 scooter, released on the wave of success of the 403 model. It had a steel body and a front luggage compartment, and a little later the S57 model appeared. These were beautiful machines with a 2-stroke engine and a 3-speed gearbox with a foot-operated shifting mechanism, which were very popular. Interestingly, these cars had a pointer indicator showing the engaged gear. 30,000 scooters were sold in 7 years. And yes, by the end of the 50s, Peugeot completely abandoned motorcycles and mopeds in favor of scooters. Peugeot developed an aggressive strategy for this segment. Scooter models 101 and 102 were released in '69, then 103 and 104 at the end of '71. The products turned out to be wildly popular. This made Peugeot the leader of the French moped market. Thanks to 2 new factories in Rommel and Saint Louis, Peugeot was producing 800,000 mopeds a year in the 70s. 800,000 a year of traditionally reliable, simple, and elegant products. It was only in 1978 that Peugeot slightly deviated from its new ideology and released a line of motocross and enduro motorcycles to the market, which were equipped with 2-stroke engines ranging from 80 to 200 cubic centimeters. Based on the 200 cubic centimeter enduro, a version was even made for the French Army called the X200. In the 80s, scooters became fashionable, and in 1982, the company introduced the SC and SX scooters to the general public, the first Peugeot scooters with plastic body elements. The subsequent evolution of Peugeot scooters was aimed at keeping them competitive among the industry leaders. Model lineups were updated, new engine displacement classes were introduced, 80, 100, 125, and so on. Innovations were implemented. In 2002, Peugeot expanded its model lineup and released the SV 250 model. which no longer had anything in common with its younger siblings. The model had similarities with the Honda Foresight, since it is a licensed copy. In the new century, Peugeot continued to develop its line of scooters. In 2006, a line of lightweight motorcycles was released in the Enduro, Supermoto, and Sport classes, with engines ranging from 50 to 125 cc. These models, having been updated, are still being produced to this day. Peugeot's scooter manufacturing business grew slowly in the early 2010s and became unprofitable for the company. For example, in 2013, 79,000 units were sold. Yes, that's a bit more than in 2012, but the management was clearly not satisfied with that. Of course, it's not the volumes of the 70s. Apparently, that's why Peugeot made a deal with the Indian automotive giant Mahindra. The deal was completed in 2015, and Mahindra acquired a controlling stake, 51%. Judging by how things went afterwards, it was a reasonable decision. Peugeot scooters continued to develop. Also, thanks to Mahindra, Peugeot motorcycles returned to racing in 2016 in the Moto 3 class. With machines like these, the prototype of the Peugeot MGP30 motorcycle has a lot in common with the machines that Mahindra is already using in Moto 3. Nevertheless, the French manufacturer is making its debut in GP as an independent constructor. At the moment, the top model is the three-wheeled Peugeot Metropolis with a 400cc engine and a bunch of electronic features. The machine can boast a power output of 35.6 horsepower and a range of up to 300 kilometers on 13 liters of fuel stored in the gas tank. The company is also flirting with electric motors as a replacement for internal combustion engines in its products. For example, here's the Peugeot High Motion 3 concept. Today, Peugeot Motorcycles produces more than 350,000 scooters and mopeds annually.
50 тысяч скутеров и мопедов.
Only time will tell what the brand with the lion logo will bring us in the future. That's the story, my friends, of two-wheeled motorized vehicles from Peugeot. I hope the story turned out to be informative and interesting enough. Although I'm sure there will be people who will comment like, hey, you forgot to mention this particular scooter model from 1999 or something like that. Friends, in the stories about motorcycle manufacturing, my goal is not to tediously list all of the company's products. I think the main thing is to look at the key stages in the brand's history, the most significant models and achievements. Sometimes I might miss an important fact, and if you know it, please write it in the comments. It will be interesting for me and for others as well. As always, you've been watching CrossMoto. As they usually say, watch, recommend, subscribe, and comment. Special greetings to the Peugeot Club. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.